Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video I want to ramble on for a bit about bad builds versus good bad builds. And I can understand that may sound a little bit confusing. Just to define it, we're talking about bad versions of B tier, C tier builds, maybe even D tier builds, and instead trying to make good versions of them. As quite often people will run B tier kind of builds. For instance, in this video we'll be discussing a backfire build, and well, the backfire in itself just will never really make sense, especially if you're looking at it from a damage output way. What it is a different playstyle, trying to maximize out getting those stacks up, trying to find good places to use it, even though it will never compete against the Oreo Striker, for instance. And in this video, we'll go about versions that have been made by others, and one that is I've seen pop up in some Reddit post and in a person's video, which we'll be using. And we'll be putting that up against what if you actually think about what you're doing and actually try to make a good version of that build. And we'll discuss how bad builds happen, and then how preferably good bad builds will take their place. And we'll go also as well into, for instance, a pestilence build, and even touch on one of my favorites. But yeah, let's actually introduce the build that I'll be using as the bad build version, and then we'll go into what I would say is a much better version, and we'll go into the numbers of it in a bit as well. So yeah, let's hop into that. And this is the example we'll be using for a bad build. It is provided to us by this content creator. They are pretty well known in the community for just making bad builds, as a lot of the content creators are. It's more about clickbait and just trying to get numbers into a title over actually thinking about builds. And in this case, actually, they have made a build that has propped up quite a bit lately for backfire. A lot of people, especially in Reddit and in some discourse I've seen, have gone and said, put 2 pieces of Cavalier in there, and it is a dumb thing to do. It has, as often is with using 2 pieces of any gear set. We'll go into why in a little bit, but first let's look at what they have provided. And in this case, it should be instantly clear from just the amount of blues that are here that they will not be hazard protected fully against the bleed, because they have 2 pieces of Cavalier providing 30% hazard protection. They'll have 10 from the watch, 40, and then they have a further 3 blues, and only those could be, of course, towards the bleed resistance that the backfire need. And they've landed on 17. Now, in their defense, they try to like play it off as, oh, I'll pop my healing chem underneath me. I'll pop. That's why they're sharpshooter. They'll pop their sharpshooter med pack that will help them with hazard protection, which it does. It clears up a hazard and will give you increased immunity for a little while. All of those, though, are completely unnecessary. Let's go into the stats that they provide, the hard stats of this build. And that is that, yeah, they have 70 bleed resistance, as is shown there. And if I can find their crit chance, crit damage, they have made a major mistake there as well, as we see here. It is hard to read because of the white background. That's usually why I go into the void when I'm talking about stats. And that is that they have a total of 36 crit chance and then 122 crit damage. So they've put most of those reds that they have towards crit damage, which is also the wrong thing to do here. You're going to get a metric buttload of crit damage from the backfire. That is his mechanic. Why would you stay to 36 crit chance? We'll fix that for them actually when we go into the numbers, because this is an exceptionally dumb thing to do. You should always ratio your crit chance and crit damage. Try to get a good ratio. You're going to get 200 crit damage. This crit chance should be 60. There is no reason not to hit the cap, even if you're going to have to waste some points to be in the cap. Doing this is just dumb. They had the option of not doing that. They did. This is even something that in most of the Discord posts or ending, people will actually usually say, yeah, the max out your crit chance because you're getting a ton of crit damage. That is the mechanic you're going after. So yeah, they have 70 hazard protection, and they've wasted their way. They have set up their crit chance and crit damage. Now let's put my money where my mouth is, as I have that ability to do that at least a little bit, I feel, as we'll jump back into the game and the character that I was standing here in a beautiful vista with the sun shining now. Instead of 2 pieces of Cavalier, we take 2 brand pieces that have good brand bonuses towards us. So crit chance from Cheska and Sokolov providing us SMG damage. This even allows us, because they would have the same opportunity if they wanted to go full hazard protection towards bleed. Not full hazard protection, but 100% against bleed. We're doing that by having 10 from the watch. It's all 6 pieces have hazard protection rolled onto them. And we follow that up with 3 bleed resistance mods, taking us to the full 100% against bleed. So we are actually bleed resistance. We don't need to do any shenanigans. We get to just be firewall, have the striker shield, never have to deal with like having to med pack, because those things take time. Throwing down a chem will take a second. Instead, in that second, you could be shooting. Now, stat-wise, in a second, we'll see that actually this thing does more damage than theirs by a tiny amount. And it does so with 30% more bleed resistance. How does this happen? The reason is very simple, is a simple understanding of, instead of giving up 2 brands bonuses to get that 30 hazard protection, we can just put it in these other slots. 36 crit damage does not hold up against 10 crit chance and 10 SMG damage. It just will not. And where we do use 2 pieces of Cavalier, for instance, in like full-on raid tanks, although I don't have it, this is an older variant where now I could actually replace 2 pieces of Eclipse, or the 3 pieces that I have Eclipse here. I could replace that with 2 pieces of Cavalier and still get the same amount of hazard protection. The reason we do use it, for instance, in a tank form like this is because we don't care about the stats. We're willing to give up a lot of the stats because all we really care about is hazard protection and then just survivability. This that we're using here is a damage build. And because of that, its stats matter towards the weapon. Now, let's jump into the numbers, and let me actually show the difference between these in their burst and sustained DPS. And here is the calculator as I filled it in for today. These are multi-calculators of my design. They're designed for comparing up to 10 builds. And in this case, just to give a short intro to them, as there's also a video available on my channel that you can watch, which more in-depth explains them. But the short version is that input happens down here, and then up here we have the output. We're comparing up to 10 builds. All of the percentages are comparing to the build in the top slot, and especially it's spitting out a burst and a sustained DPS number, and numbers to check against the range at. One thing I'll say up front is we're leaving out headshot. It doesn't matter for the comparison's sakes. All of them have the same headshot multiplier, so they would just be increasing the numbers by that amount. We're leaving that out just for simplicity's sake. In here then we have this like pinkish hue, which is actually a build that I should actually show, which is my preferred version actually of running this build, and that is with an obliterate chest as I have it here, and then the striker mask, basically without the striker chest. This is much more generally usable, although of course there are places where you can get strikers to 200 and then backfire to 200, and then at those points the backfire does deal good damage, but actually I'll show in a little bit that, yeah, with the Oreo especially having come in, even then it does not compete. But yeah, let's jump back to the numbers here. Then the second set of numbers, and there is a reason that there are 2 of them for the pink and the purple one. One is the empty numbers, so with everything, with the backfire not charged up. In all of them, the striker is fully charged up, so either to 100 or 200, but then the crit damage numbers that we would get from the backfire are left out. And then one with and then one without, basically. With the blue ones, it's a little bit different. There we have first the numbers provided as by that other content creator for their build, and then a fixed version with just flipping 2 crit damages to crit chance and helping them out to even stand a chance, because otherwise they wouldn't at all. And these other two we'll discuss in a second, with the orange and the red one. But if we especially compare the purple versus the blue, and especially the second one in each category with the backfire fully filled up and the fixed version of their build. The fixed version, basically, I flipped 2 crit damages to crit chance, gaining them from 36 crit chance going to 48. Still not going up to the crit cap, but that was the 2 crit damages that they could easily flip in the form of mods. So that's the reason I went with that. We might alter this number as well in a second. We can see that basically both of them do around the same 15 million damage, but the version that I have there wins out. And then there is, of course, a very important caveat, and that is that the version that I'm showing is 100% bleed resistant. Their version was only 70%, so they have to do shenanigans. So on top of this, we can have the firewall shield, giving us a further 11%. And yeah, that means that this is the basis of why you should think about your builds and try to, even when you're making B tier or C tier builds, try to make the best version of that B tier or C tier build. Putting in 2 pieces of Cavalier should instantly be a red flag, mostly because you're giving up stats. All builds, what they are at their core is just a bunch of stats. Whenever you're 2-piecing a gear set, it better provide you with a really good return on investment. And that just isn't here. For instance, there are reasons to use 2 pieces of Cavalier. Well, I actually don't have that build at the ready here to show. What I do have is the version that will take that in, which is actually this Ray tank, which is full hazard protected. In here, I'm using 2 pieces of Eclipse, which is the old version of doing it. Since Cavalier came in, we could replace these 3 pieces of Eclipse with 2 pieces of Cavalier, gaining us another thing that we could put in here, for instance, a Catharsis or even something else. And the reason it will work in a build like this is we do not care about the stats outside of hazard protection and just having like tankiness and blue cores. We don't care about its damage output. Whenever we are thinking about damage output, the brand bonuses are so important to that giving them up to 2-piece Cavalier is instant red flag territory. And 3-piecing basically any gear set as well is usually just a dumb thing to do. And yeah, Ninja Bike doesn't save it because Ninja Bike just usually make things worse, especially when you're doing a striker build, because it's going to eat up that backpack talent. And the backpack talent, either just the backpack talent of striker, or even if you were going for something else in the form of vigilance or something, losing that is too much of a loss for it to bear. If we jump back into the numbers, we can also see that, because yeah, they're here even still with the fixed version. So actually with their non-fixed version, they were even further behind. And that is the reason as well to look at your ratio and actually do that calculation and see, is it better if I flip 1 crit damage to crit chance? For those unfamiliar, let me actually explain it, that yeah, you can just take your crit chance number and your crit damage number, multiply them together in whatever form you want, as long as it's the same for both calculations, basically. And bigger number wins. Bigger number usually happens as well, because here we're going to insane numbers of crit damage. For most builds, we're going to 250 and we're going to like 300 something. 60 crit chance is obvious that it should be here. I don't have that option on my build. I've put in a Cheska, and then the 2 rolls that I have are put towards crit chance, and I'm landing on 58. And that will just have to make do. In their option as well, they would have 1 more crit chance to be able to be flipped. And that would actually put them ahead of my version of the build in damage, in burst damage output. But of course, they would still be at that 70% hazard protection. And as anybody who has actually ever ran a backfire build, you can't really run it even with below the bleed immunity without. Once in a while, what will happen is that you'll be bleeding and you'll get shot by the enemy at the same time. The bleed will be just long enough that it will go through, and while your health gate is active, will basically be a longer activeness than that, or you will get shot and you'll reload at that time, and that bleed would take you to the ground, and that's just quite annoying, and you just don't want to deal with that. Dealing with it in other ways as well will usually lose you more than enough damage to not make it worth it versus a bleed immunity. For instance, of course, you can ninja bike it and stuff, but still, there is not always the availability to just cover to cover or vault over something to reset ammo, and especially with a 50-round mag, that's not really viable. So yeah, in the end, these kind of builds, it's important. They're going to be weaker anyway. It's important to try to make the best version of them. And the difference between it being made by somebody that kind of knows what they're doing, which I'll be arrogant and say I kind of do, versus somebody that obviously doesn't and has put out so many bad builds that they have that reputation at this point. Even because they will still not do the crit ratio calculation and just actually fix their crit chances and stuff. They just make bad builds. And instead, you could have good bad builds. But instead of all that, you could also just have... this is still a bad build, which is this orange number, which is taking the variant that I was using, basically the chess variant, as I have it here. And if instead of a backfire, we put in a Oreo at the same grading, ungraded. If we go back to the numbers, we can see here that numbers-wise, actually, this lands on close to 12 million burst DPS, meaning that it is pretty close, actually, between the 8 and the 16 million. So it's basically at the 100 stacks of the backfire. And of course, the Oreo is going to do that a lot. Well, I mean, it's going to do it whenever this striker is stacked to 200. It's also going to stack striker to 200 much faster. This number already is, of course, then. And of course, this is still that same build. This isn't an Oreo striker. This is using a bleed resistant striker with just Oreo. I would call this already a better bad build. And then, of course, if we just go to a good build, and this is the reason why a backfire will always be a bad build, mostly because we don't need anywhere where we have that amount of hazard protection. Hazard protection just doesn't show up as a mechanic. We have it in raids and stuff, but even there, usually just a person needs to run a hazard protection. The rest will just avoid the hazards. And it just never really works out, because if we then go to this last number with the red, this is just the Oreo on what is commonly known as an incursion variant. You're running it with contractors and coyote, and numbers wise, we can see that it just beats it outright. It is a chest striker as well. Again, it needs to stack to that same 200, but of course, all of the ones we were mostly comparing, all of them are stacking to 200 anyway. But once stacked to 200, the Oreo is doing, without any of the shenanigans, needing all of that hazard protection, all of those things, it is just doing more. It's doing 18.5 million, basically, close to 18.34 million. And that is a lot more than the 15 million. In 5 seconds, it will do 1 second's worth of the backfire on top of the backfire. And that is a lot. In a fight, for instance, like the Lovebirds, where numbers like that matter. And of course, as well, in sustain, it is going to do much better because the Oreo has an insane reload speed. So yeah, it's just going to lose out. The backfire is always going to lose out to... in general play, especially against most other options that existed. And now with the Oreo in the game, it will just lose out, full stop, non-stop. And then, of course, this is not a bad build. This is just a good build. And not a bad version of a good build, but just a good version of a good build. And yeah, let's go on to one other that I kind of enjoy as we won't go into the numbers or anything of it, but we'll just discuss it and kind of the mindset and how the good bad version of it exists. Before we move on, I want to touch on one other thing, just to have discussed it as the reason actually that, of course, they went with a bad version, basically, is that they, as many of the content creators use, will go for the damage numbers on a weapon and the damage numbers that it hits for. And that is always a simple red flag to me, because if we go to their video, of course, they've went in and used it on the range. This always should be a red flag for you if somebody is using the range in this way. I just wanted to discuss that because here we see as well, look how many crit damages they have there in between all of those numbers. That's what 36 crit chance will look like in your crit hits. But of course, they will take the number of the crit hit and advertise that basically as a number. The ratio between those matters. That's why we do DPS calculations, because if you're doing the range as they are here, and yeah, you're having those numbers pop up without it being converted into DPS, without the RPM of a weapon as well being there, it is completely useless. And of course, as well, just having any number like this of 372 crit in the video title should also instantly be a red flag, because this is over investing in one stat. And that is something that you shouldn't do. You should diversify your multipliers. That is a core thing to all build making. Anytime I see a really high number for a stat put somewhere, I already know it's just going to be a bad build. And 9 times out of 10, I am not surprised once I watch the video and see the build in there. And this is at the core as well of just the content creatorship that kind of exists nowadays around the division, where people are going very much for just not going after DPS, which at this point is just, there are so many tools available for anybody that is interested to just calculate out their DPS, that any person that is talking about any form of damage without doing it with DPS, or a different form, some people are pushing for TTK if you want to use that, but then at least consistently use that. Just using damage numbers is a dumb thing to do for this reason, for this exact reason that they're doing it, where they have that 36 crit chance and they're fine with it because it's pumping out bigger damage numbers, where if you actually even wanted to make it remotely usable, you would have the sensibility to lose a little bit of that big numbers and make it more effective, because a little less big numbers more often is actually more damage. And that is at the core of kind of a lot of bad builds, where they'll go for one stat over everything. They'll go, oh, I've made 200 damage to armor into here. I've put the contractors and Walker and Harris and all of that. And they think they've done a good thing. They're putting DTA then as well on their weapon and just completely butchering a build. And yeah, let's move on actually to the thing I teased a second ago of another good bad build and the mindset behind it. And here we are with that build. And yeah, with the weapon held in my hand, it should be obvious what I'm going for. And that is Pestilence. Pestilence will also always make for bad builds at its core. Mechanically, you're much better off just shooting them with an effective weapon and just murdering them. But of course, Pestilence at times is quite enjoyable to try to maximize towards its mechanics and trying to get the most out of a Pestilence build. It's quite a different gameplay style than trying to get the most out of, for instance, a full red striker or something like that. And in the Pestilence world as well, there is quite a lot of bad choices I see being made. One is trying to maximize for its Plague talent. It is, of course, scaling off of weapon damage. So what quite a lot of people will often do is put in Sawyers, try to put in 2 pieces of Heartbreaker, which always hurts my soul a little bit for the same reasons, same obvious reasons. And the reason for that is, instead of trying to maximize for the tick, what is actually the effective choice, although at least on this there could be some debate, but I'm feeling pretty strongly on one end of it, and that is trying to, instead of just maximizing for the tick and giving up a lot of damage on the weapon hit, instead as well just making it an effective build. Keeping your crit chance at, for instance, here I'm hitting 60. I'm doing that by even giving up Fox. I'm not using Fox's Prayer. I am using Contractors because, of course, Contractors LMG bonus is active here for this LMG. I am willing to give up Fox because I need that crit chance. Taking Fox here will actually, if I had a Fox's Prayer in there, it would improve the tick because Detox does apply to the tick there, and would increase that by a little bit, but I would actually overall be losing damage. And the reason for that is, alongside of that tick, this thing is actually also shooting bullets and killing things with it hitting. And because of that, trying to maximize what I'm doing here for a decent enough crit chance crit damage of having 6153 on a weapon that has no crit chance mods on it at all is quite important. I'm going even 2 pieces of Providence and then 1 piece of Cheska, not even taking the crit damage out, because we need all of these, because we have 10 from the watch. Currently, then we have a further 20 from these 2 brand bonuses of 2-piece Providence and then a piece of Cheska. At that point, we need a further 30. With a lot of weapons, you would have 15 on the weapon itself. If you're running a FAMAS or something like that, you have 3 mod slots filled with crit chance. If you have a Elmo, you have 20. If you have an Oreo, you have 31. This has 0. So you have to make up for that. And that means that, yeah, we need 5 slots to be filled with crit chance, leaving us just 1 slot. We're taking the Contractors here. We want to keep crit damage alongside of damaged armor. Basically, whenever you're putting crit chance on either Fox's Prayer or Contractors, or even a Picaros, you're actually basically doing it wrong. If you should be basically maximizing all your crit damage rolls already, otherwise you're already giving up damage. And in this case, it's very much that. And we're going with 2 pieces of Walker. Here is one of the rare places where Walker, because it is actually, even with this 1 piece of weapon damage, is providing damage towards both the tick and the damage end of just the firing damage of the Pestilence. 2-piecing Walker and Harris actually is a good choice here. Because instead, what a lot of people do is they'll put in 2 pieces of Heartbreaker. They'll gain 15 LMG damage from that, and they'll lose 2 rolls. Because they'll have basically this +5 weapon damage and +5 damage to armor will be replaced with 15 LMG damage. And that is more. That is objectively more. But then each piece has 1 minor roll, meaning that you're losing 2 minor rolls here. And that extra, if you just see these as just 2 5%ers, that extra 5% will not match up against 2 12 crit damages or 2 6 crit chances. It just won't. And that is, again, the way that a lot of people make a bad build with the Pestilence. Instead, I would consider, for instance, this a good bad build. Although actually, with how it currently is, it might actually be worth reinvestigating this and trying to put Strikers in here, because of course Strikers is gonna outdo most things on the firing end. And I've already kind of theorized that, yeah, we could go still having a glass chest, a sacrifice most likely, because the sacrifice of course does apply to both as well as it does apply to the tick. With the Contractors and then 4-piecing Strikers, and that will likely actually outdo this. But even without that, just trying to maximize for the tick ends up being just making a worse version of this build. And that's quite often the case, just by trying to maximize for one thing. Quite often the term comes up of a jack of all trades and master of none in a derogatory term. The thing is actually that has a further part to it, which is that oftentimes better than a master of one. And that is always true. A jack of all trades is actually usually more useful than a master of one, unless you really need that, if you need a brain surgeon to operate on your brain, okay, a master of one, a master of one is, it's completely fine. But usually you want to make sure that more parts, if in a viable sense, if it's available in here, trying to maximize just for the tick, ends up just making a very big tick, makes for good clickbait, makes for a terrible build, I find. Keeping the damage up on the weapon itself, to me, ends up being a much better ratio, basically, between the tick and the weapon damage. Let's move on to one last build, which in essence is actually not even a good bad build, but just a good weird build. But yeah, let's pull it up. And here we are with one last build we're going to look at. And by the colors I'm wearing, some will already have guessed what build this will be. And that is, of course, a purple build. And a purple build is inherently just going to go towards being a bad build. It is just high-end exists and trying to be superior, as we are here with purple rarity, always will mean that we will end up worse. We don't have many mod slots. Even the base damage of weapons is lower. Stat-wise, it is a lot harder to farm. You can't optimize anything. You have to farm on hard for it and stuff. But even there, what we can do is try to get the most out of the build. And their theory crafting as well exists. Same for instance, in World Tier 5, where a bunch of the brands are missing. Here again as well, even though I'm limiting myself to purple, I'm still landing on 60 crit chance, 134 crit damage. Although we have no detalk on here because Fox's Prayer, Contractors, all the named Sacrifice, all of those things do not drop as purples. Together with that, the weapons do not have a third stat. So in the case of this LMG, I would have a detalk, but that actually makes LMGs quite a little bit stronger for purple builds, for instance, shifting the balance. But even in a build like this, thinking about what you're going to put together really matters. Because this is, of course, a challenge build. For those interested, there's a build showcase about them that you can go and watch if you really want to know in depth how they're put together and how they're farmed as well. But at its core, this is going to be a bad build. But at the very least, again, this is what I would say at least a good bad build, the better version of a bad build that I can make. And of course, that's by going for choices in the brands and knowing that, for instance, I can, if I need to go this route, three-piecing Providence makes a lot of sense. Cheska and Grupo are available here, where they, for instance, aren't at World Tier 5 builds. Putting a Cheska and a Grupo in here basically is is an instant thing to do. Fenris then, of course, fills up the last slot quite fast. Trying to go for crit chance and crit damage, tried and tested way, is an important thing to do. And then, for instance, here what I'm doing is going for weapon handling. We are hitting actually that 60 crit chance, which actually this build for a long time didn't, because a lot of the rolls I'll be getting out of hard will be around like this, which with this chest, that, for instance, still to this day is one of the better chests that I have gotten with crit chance, crit damage, and obliterate on it. Because, of course, we only get to recalibrate one thing. In this case, I've done the weapon core. And even having halfway ups once in a while, I'll have one that is fully like a decent, close to a guard roll for purple drops. But even there, for instance, I have not recalibrated the core here, and then the maxed out core on a purple is 13 versus the 15 on a high end. So even there's like choices that matter, and of course even a maxed out crit chance, for instance, is also just 5.5, I believe, off the top of my head. And a build like this, again, at least this is, I would say, a good bad build. Although in this case, we're really going for the bad part is truly, this is a D tier build. So that part has dropped a lot. And if you want to make bad builds, because as well, first off, let's say that if you see people running red builds, full red, and they have messed up in many ways and landed on lower crit chance and crit damage than this build, at that point, what are you doing? How did you mess up that bad? If you're losing out against the purple build on crit chance, crit damage, which quite a lot of people in random matchmaking with just jumbled messes will end up doing, because one of the things I do run this for is I'll random matchmake. If the team is decently strong, I'll keep it at purple. If they are very weak, I won't make it a full struggle by staying this purple, and I'll grab a more effective build. But what I will try to do is beat people on kills and stuff, and that's quite enjoyable. Trying to by challenging, dropping my own damage down, not by just having less stats, which is at the core of all builds. The reason this is worse is just in the end it's less stats than any of the other options. And of course, like we can't have strikers as purple because it doesn't drop as purple. And yeah, if you're going to go challenge yourself, at least make something like this, something that at least will, when people inspect it, will put a smile on their face instead of just purely bad builds. Because I'm pretty certain that, for instance, that's a build that showed up recently, which was a magazine-size build, of course, put out by a horrendous content creator, where they tried to get a magazine size of a GR9 to into the 400s. This build will beat that easily. In 50 rounds, this build will do more damage than they did in 400 rounds. And the reason for that is quite simple. That's just how the stats work out. In the end, that's all we are. We're just a bunch of stats, and those stats add and multiply in different ways together, and that just gives some numbers on the enemy. If you do it poorly, you will suffer for it. And in the end, there is some value to running good bad builds, I would say. I quite enjoy running that backfire build. I quite enjoy running that pestilence build. And I very much enjoy running this purple build. Not for their effectiveness, but just for a little bit of challenge or just a different playstyle. Playing the same build over and over again gets quite dull for me. So for instance, even maximizing out, even for instance with this build, it alters the playstyle because I can't kill as fast. So I need to play it a lot more conservatively. I need to make a lot of 1 versus 1s happen. Just so I can kill them before, because if I stand in front of the 2 enemies, I can't kill one quickly enough for me to then, for instance, with a striker, you could maybe kill both of them in the time that they get you to your armor and your health gate is there. You might be able to kill both of them. Here, I likely won't be, so I need to play it a lot more conservatively, try to get them more out of it. And that's quite enjoyable. There are reasons to play bad builds, but if you're going to play a bad build, make it a good bad build. And that, is at the core of this discussion. And I hope at least I gave you some insights here and some things to think about next time when theory crafting out some builds. And yeah, for my next video, it's going to be another rambling talk that will hopefully be followed up by an in-depth guide into burst and sustained DPS and damage per mag. And that together will be then followed up by a build showcase of X0 Ortiz and, well, also a bad build. We'll try to make some good bad builds out of that one as well. So yeah, I hope you join me for those or over on Twitch when I'm streaming quite often. And as always, have a good night.